Hey, party people, Ben from Pivot Wealth, and today I'm bringing you the money news in human words, helping you understand the headlines and what sits beneath them so that you can learn how to, I suppose, interpret them to make the smartest moves for you. Now, the first thing on my radar for this week was around the federal budget deficit was slashed by half. So basically $40 billion better than what was predicted just in March of 2021. So literally like 3 months ago. And down by basically at 30% of what was forecast in 2021. So basically what's happened is that as a result of commodity prices being way higher than what was forecast, unemployment being much lower than was anticipated, lower welfare expenses payouts by the government, and a big boost in corporate tax revenue, the budget is in a lot better shape. So it was forecast to be an $80 billion deficit. It's now only going to be a $40 billion deficit, which is huge. And it shows the strength of the Australian economy, I suppose, to ride out some of the market conditions like what we're seeing at the moment globally. I think it's important to note that this is based on the current financial year, and the current financial year was massively impacted by COVID restrictions and that impact on the economy. So I think a massive win means that the Australian economy is in a much stronger position than was anticipated. And I think that puts us in a good spot with the current conditions that we're seeing globally, high inflation around the world, that flow and impact through the economy as well. And I think means good things for investment markets and for property markets. So I suppose it sort of goes a little bit against what a lot of the doomsayers are saying in the headlines, where we're talking about this massive share market collapse and the economy's going in the tank and a recession. And look, the recession might come, but I suppose what it means is that overall the economy is in a pretty good shape. So I think that should be really welcome news for a lot of Australians, a lot of investors, job security, wage growth, all of these sorts of things. So some great news to start the week. The next piece that I thought was interesting to talk about is the fears around the housing market crash in Australia might be premature. So it's weird because the forecast has actually just increased in terms of the forecast drop in the property market values across Australia is now down to 20%. It was previously forecast by the RBA at 15%. So they're saying that by the end of 2023, they're forecasting that the property market will be 20% lower than the peak that we saw back end of last year. But the data is showing us at the moment that the economy is actually holding up really well. So the Sydney market has cooled by between 3 and 4% over the last little bit, but that's off the back of a 25% rise over the 12 months prior. So the market's holding up incredibly well. What we're also seeing is that a lot of vendors, a lot of property sellers, that they're not wanting to sell their properties at prices below the peak. So there's a bit of price anchoring, a bit of psychology that's coming into people's minds that are selling properties, where they don't want to accept prices below what they've seen them before. And what that's meaning is that the markets are holding up better. But what that also means is that there's more risk in the more shallow markets. And what happens is that when no one will sell their properties below a certain level, then the prices hold up really well. But if people are forced to sell, then they're going to have to accept whatever. And then the property values can go down. The prices can go way down. And this is why, for example, with properties that like apartments in massive inner city, big complex buildings, that they tend to be impacted more, because particularly in like the Sydney CBD, Melbourne CBD, and potentially Brisbane as well, we get a lot of foreign investors into those bigger properties in those city locations, and they care less when the prices go down, because if you've got a foreign investor that needs to get some capital out, they just take their capital, they take whatever price you can get, and then immediately the value of all other properties in that building, they go down, because your neighbors just accepted a lower price point. So it immediately means that your property is sort of worth the same, or at least it is on paper. So I think that means that you need to be careful if you are investing in those markets. It can be a little bit more shallow, where there's less turnover of properties. But look, I think that there's still strong demand that we're seeing across all markets where people are looking at bargains. What they're seeing as bargains from the recent highs that we've been seeing. So I don't believe that all markets will be impacted in the same way. I've mentioned this on the podcast before, where I think that there's some markets where there's less demand and maybe more supply that are going to be impacted more, and then other suburbs where the supply is tighter but the demand is still strong will hold up pretty well. And on top of this, we're still seeing markets outside of Sydney and Melbourne that are rising: Perth, Adelaide, Gold Coast. Those markets are still going up, so it seems like there's a bit more price growth before things start to decline. I suppose one thing though, and brings me on to my next piece, where one thing that could impact what I was just talking about is that around the fact that there's a lot of fixed rate rises that are coming over the next little while. A lot of Aussies in Australia, a lot of property buyers and property investors fixed their mortgage interest rates when interest rates were at all-time lows. So well done if that was you. But essentially, what we're seeing now, the stats are telling us that more than 40% of Australian mortgage holders will have their fixed rate terms end over the next 12 months. So that's a huge amount of mortgage holders. And pretty much all of them are going to be seeing increases in the cost of their mortgage borrowing. Fixed rates are now enormously high. They're like 2 percentage points higher than what they were at this time last year, because mortgage interest rates are tipped to increase over the next little while. So if you want to lock in your rate now, you're going to be paying what the banks expect the rates to be in the future. Means you're going to be paying a lot more. And it does create some risk, because when we're seeing this big jump in mortgage expenses, it means that some people are going to struggle to afford those payments, and then they're potentially looking at having to exit their property so that they don't default on their mortgage, essentially. And that has a negative impact, obviously, on property values and the property market overall. So look, I think with rising interest rates, I think that there are going to be some Australians that are going to struggle to make those payments. And I think that also is something that's potentially going to cause a lot of stress for people over the next little bit. So look, if this is you, if you've got a fixed rate mortgage and you're staring down the barrel of that expiring, and therefore you needing to pay more, then now is the time to be planning. And we've helped a few people with this recently, found that you don't need to have a silver. Unfortunately, there is no silver bullet solution, but you don't need to have an immediate solution. But no matter what way you're going to go, the easiest time to start planning for that and the easiest time to prepare yourself is now. So put your plan in place, and then you'll immediately get that relief, because you'll be able to know and see what's going to happen as your rates expire over the next little while. So, dot your I's, cross your T's, put that plan in place. Going to go a long way to giving you peace of mind as those deadlines loom. Staying with the broader economy, the next piece I wanted to talk about was the UK inflation data, which has just been released, and it's hit a 40-year high. Now, you might think that the UK really doesn't impact us too much, but it does flow on around the world and around global markets. Basically, their inflation rate is currently 9.1% to the 12 months to May 2022, which is up from where it was last month, and way above where the target banding is for there. So it hits a 40-year high for inflation. We're seeing that flow through, obviously, to all of the prices that we're seeing, and look at the cost of goods at the shops, and the scarcity of lettuce and cost of that, which we're obviously seeing. That I think we can expect some more rises over the next 12 months coming. And I think that things will probably get a little bit worse before they get better. I will note with this stuff, though, that there are a lot of things that are outside of the control of central banks, like the Reserve Bank in Australia, the Fed in the US, and the UK central bank as well, that it doesn't matter how far. When we see inflation really high, it suggests that the Reserve banks are going to need to push rates up faster, so that prices come back to the price growth slows to something more in their target band. But there are so many things that are currently outside of the control of the central banks. Think like utility prices, petrol, the supply chain impact that's coming through the Ukraine and Russia conflict at the moment, that it doesn't matter if interest rates were 20% tomorrow, we're still going to be paying a ton for our energy. We're still going to be paying a lot for our petrol. We're still going to be paying more for some goods that we want. And that isn't going to change because people have less money. These are necessary goods that we all need. So, like I said, I think things probably going to get a little bit worse before they get better. But yeah, uh, definitely one to watch over the next little while. Next piece, and a bit more practically, I suppose, with the 30 June end of financial year deadline around the corner, the ATO is currently cracking down on people trying to claim more in their 2022 return to recoup the higher cost of living that we've been seeing over the last little while. They've released their hit list and the areas that they'll be focused on over the next little while. And one of the main ones that they've got on there is the increase in overclaiming of work from home expenses. And I think a lot of people have been working in the bunker life, know that there are some things that claim and things that you should be claiming in your tax return. But the ATO are keeping a close eye on this and are going to be cracking down for people that are overclaiming in those areas. So making sure that you're keeping good records and doing all of those things so that if the ATO asks any questions, that you've got everything in place so that you don't end up in hot water. We saw that the ATO Assistant Commissioner Tim Lowe came out and spoke to ABC News talking about people trying to push the envelope with their work-related COVID-type expenses, that they're going to be targeted. So there is also something, and this is more for as an FYI for next financial year, but the 80 cents per hour method for claiming working from home expenses does cease on the 30th of June. So that means that you might need to be keeping a logbook from the 1st of July to continue claiming your work from home expenses. Obviously, we're seeing this huge rise in people working from home over the last little while. So I suppose it's right for the ATO to have that on their radar. But again, for everybody, keep good records, know what you can claim, what you can't claim, so that you don't end up in hot water. Keeping with the practical theme around personal finances, and from the 1st of July, we are getting a number of superannuation changes that are coming into effect. The first one, and welcome news for a lot of Aussies, is that superannuation contributions, the superannuation guarantee, so the part of your salary that's mandated from your employer to pay to your super fund, is increasing to 10.5% from the current rate of 10%, so an increase of 0.5% to kick in from 1 July. With that one, just look at how your contract's structured and make sure it is exclusive of super. Inclusive, it depends on how your contract is worded as to whether your salary is inclusive or exclusive of super, as to whether your super contributions will just go up or your pay might actually go down to absorb that extra super cost. Probably a good opportunity to chat to your employer in a tight labor market, the rising cost of living, that talking about potentially getting that bump to an exclusive of super type arrangement so that you can not see your pay decline as a result. Probably a conversation worth having for anyone in that boat. Another one is that the $450 minimum monthly income for super contribution guarantee will be scrapped, meaning that where this particularly impacted was people that had multiple different jobs where they were earning less than the $450 a month threshold, where an employer is actually required to make those compulsory super contributions on your behalf. So now you can have multiple employers. They're all required to pay that super guarantee contribution. So really good for gig workers and people that have got multiple jobs. The other big one is that the downsizer contribution eligibility reduces to age 60. So for anyone that's a bit older, or for your parents, if you're listening in, basically from age 60, anyone that's downsizing, they have the ability to contribute $300,000 per person into their superannuation, which gets a bunch of money into that concessionally tax favorable superannuation environment, which is a really, really good one to see. And rounding out the week with some corporate news, with Toyota facing potentially Australia's largest ever compensation payment. So hundreds of thousands of Aussies who are sold defective vehicles from Toyota will be able to apply for compensation, basically for Hilux, Prado and Fortuner vehicles between 2015 and 2020. They had a one faulty part and it impacted 260,000 Aussies. Essentially, there's a compensation payout potentially of 10,500 per vehicle. So you know anyone that drives a Prado or a Hilux, maybe let them know if they're eligible to this scheme. Getting $10,500 for free is that's good money. Guys, I hope you found that helpful. And as always, any suggestions, please just shout. I will catch you on the next one. Bye for now.